there, folks. Welcome to the channel. I'm glad you can make it. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Pro Model Large Harvest Right freeze dryer. So if you're thinking about buying a freeze dryer and you want to know a little bit more about this unit, you've come to the right place because we're going to take it out of the box. I'm going to show you everything that comes with it. We're going to talk about some of the upgraded features in the Pro line. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to share my thoughts and opinions about how I feel about this machine. Let me just give you a quick little backstory. About a year ago, we got the Large Harvest Right freeze dryer, so not the Pro model. And we were able to make a handful of videos. Some of you may have seen them on this channel. But after having it 3 months, that particular freeze dryer started to develop a refrigerant leak in the most unusual place. We made a video about that called How We Fixed Our Freeze Dryer, Part 1. We're still in the middle of working on Part 2, which for those of you that are patiently waiting is hopefully right around the corner. Nonetheless, I'll put a link to that video at the end of this video, probably about right here. Well, Harvest Right saw that video, and without getting into the details as to what happened, they basically wanted to make this situation right, so they offered to send me a replacement unit at no charge. Well, by this time, their entire line had been upgraded to the Pro model, and so they sent me a Pro Large, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And if I had to be completely honest, I've got to say that I was a little hesitant to review it right out of the box, like you see so many people do, because of my experience with the first unit. So we've been using this freeze dryer pretty much every day for the last 3 or 4 months just to really get a good feel for it. And I've learned a lot of really interesting things about the upgrades. Now, if you've looked at what they've upgraded online, you will find some confusing data and some misinformation as to what's been upgraded and what's not been upgraded. And so today we're going to clear all that up as I talk to you and show you what the actual upgrades are and how they benefit this particular machine. And of course, if you have any questions through this video, just leave them in the comments section below. All right, so without further ado, let's go take it out of the crate, which we did 4 months ago, and see what's in the box, give it a run, see how it operates. All right, our freeze dryer just showed up in a crate, and this is a really cool option if you live overseas and, your freeze dryer has a long way to travel. This really protects it from, any mishaps. But normally this is just going to come to you on a pallet. And notice you've got the accessory box at top, and you've got the freeze dryer right there below. Let's go ahead and unbox the accessories and see what's in the package. We're going to start off with the pump. This is the vacuum pump for the freeze dryer, and it looks like you're going to get a standard quart of vacuum pump oil and some manuals. Don't skip out on that literature. And at first glance, it looks like the pump that comes with the Pro series is larger than the pump that used to come with the Large. This new pump has a slightly different model number and slightly higher amps. If we put both the old and the new pump side by side, you can tell that the new pump is a little bigger, and after further research, it's actually rated to be a 10 CFM pump, whereas the one they used to send out was a 7 CFM pump. So notice the amperage here is 4.9, a little bit smaller. And so what I'm to understand is that the small and the medium get the 7 CFM pump, and then the large and the extra large get the 10 CFM pump. So pleasant surprise there. In the box, you also have an impulse sealer. This is what's going to be used to seal your Mylar bags. Very simple, nothing complex about this particular sealer. And speaking of Mylar bags, with the purchase of a freeze dryer, you also get Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. This is an 8x12 size, which is absolutely perfect for feeding 2 to 3 people, depending on, what you put inside that bag. And then you can write and label and date it and all that stuff. And then, of course, you get 50 oxygen absorbers, one for each bag. These are 700cc oxygen absorbers, and this is way overkill for an 8x12 bag, but in this particular case, it's not that big a deal. As far as the cables go, you are going to get a plug for your machine. I want you to check out the tip of the plug. That's a NEMA 520, so you're going to need a dedicated NEMA 520 outlet with a 20 amp breaker. So you might have to get an electrician involved if you don't already have that kind of a setup. All right, and the other cable you're going to get, or the hose in this particular case, is the upgraded hose for the vacuum pump. This was upgraded some time ago, and it's worked well, so that's going to be part of the Pro package. In addition to that, you're also going to get the oil filtration system. This is basically like a Brita water filter, and it allows you to filter your oil so that you can reuse it, which will save you quite a bit of money, if, of course, you want to do that. With these Premier pumps that come with the Pro series, you only have to change your oil every 20 to 30 batches, and to change the oil only takes a couple of minutes. The last thing in the kit is the stainless steel freeze dryer trays. Now, unlike the previous version, the Pro Series does come with 6 trays instead of 5. And speaking of the trays, let's go ahead and open up the freeze dryer, and you will see that we have 6 slots instead of 5. And they were able to do this by just simply reducing the space between each one of the shelves. I do have my opinions on the 6 tray versus the 5 tray shelving system, but I'm going to save those till the end of this video, so be sure to stick around so you don't miss a single bit of that information. Finally, you're going to get your user's manuals, and under normal circumstances, I would say, yeah, it's okay to buy something new and then just kind of figure it out. But when it comes to freeze dryers, I would highly advise that you read the manual from cover to cover. Freeze dryers are relatively sensitive pieces of equipment, and with proper care and light maintenance, you can enjoy freeze drying food for years to come. So definitely don't skip out on the manual. And I'm just going to give you an example. If I flip here a couple pages moving forward, you will see this one little section that talks about what we should do when we begin. So that's kind of like the initial setup section. And what it talks about is doing a bread run before you do anything else. A bread run is simply taking bread, adding a little water to it, and then putting it inside your freeze dryer. And this is going to, first and foremost, make sure that your freeze dryer is operating correctly, but it's also going to remove, any of those odors that come from the factory, and you definitely don't want that in your food. So before you put any food in there, you should probably do a bread run, and that's exactly what we're going to do right now. I'm going to show you how easy it is. Let's get the pump set up. And all we're going to do is connect the pump to the freeze dryer. So I'm going to finger tighten that hose and then just give it a little turn. There's no need to over tighten that. And then we're going to do the exact same thing on the freeze dryer. Finger tighten it and then just give it a little turn. And that is it. We need to put oil inside this pump, so we're going to unscrew the demister. Be sure to watch out for that little O-ring. You got an O-ring on the demister. You don't want that to fall off and, you lose it. And I'm going to fill this up to about halfway between the minimum and maximum mark. And that takes not quite the entire quart, a little less than the entire quart. And there we go. That's absolutely perfect. So let's go ahead and screw that back on. Very easy to do. It should screw on effortless. So you're not trying to force it in there. Just give it a little tighten and we are in business. I do want the switch on the pump to be in the on position. And that's going to look like that. And then we want this switch on the front of the pump, that's the gas ballast, to be in the O position. So that's the open position. And there we go. All right, so now that the pump is set up, we have that plugged into the back of the freeze dryer, very important. We're going to go ahead and turn it on. I am going to input my name, so if you want to do that, just click where it says system name, and you could go ahead and type in whatever you want. So we're going to put in 2 guys. Very easy to do. Hit save. All right, there it is. Okay, I want to customize this, and what we're going to do is drop the initial freeze temp to -20. I am going to increase the freeze time just a couple hours. We're going to keep the dry temperature the same, and then I'm going to increase the dry time to about 12 hours. Increasing the dry time basically just allows you to, not have to worry about your machine finishing in the middle of the night. Basically is what it means. The first time you run your machine, you are going to have to set up what type of pump you're using. And so just pick the appropriate pump. We're using the Premier Oil Pump. And this option applies to both the Premier Oil Pump and the XL Premier Oil Pump, which is what we have for this Pro Large unit. Once we hit OK and the cycle begins, it's going to cool the chamber down for 15 minutes. While that's happening, let's go ahead and get our bread ready. And all I did was just buy a cheap pack of sandwich bread, and I'm putting a bit of water on top of it. Truth is, you just need a little bit of water so that it soaks up into the bread, but I am going to be looking at the ice ring formation during this initial test because, as you might have already known, we have had a bit of problems with our previous freeze dryer, and I just want to see how this one operates with the ice rings. And so that's what we're doing right here. You definitely don't need this much water. Now that we're done, we've got all 6 trays, and it's now time for us to load the trays into the freeze dryer. So we first have to close the drain valve. And I got to tell you, the drain valve has been upgraded. It is a full stainless steel drain valve, and so we're not going to have to worry about corrosion or potential vacuum leaks through that little piece. It's also very easy to turn. All right, so that's always nice to see those little changes that happen in the upgraded units. Let's go ahead and get all 6 of those trays into this freeze dryer. Plenty of clearance if you're just doing like regular food. That's absolutely beautiful. Close it down, give it a second turn to tighten it into place. And now we hit continue so that we could start the freezing process and then eventually the drying process. And about 20 minutes into this process, let me just go ahead and open it up right quick, remove that rubber seal, and let's look at the frost pattern, right? This was a problem that I was having with my previous freeze dryer, and I am super
super excited to see that frost pattern come all the way to the very end, really about an inch and a half from the edge, and that's exactly what it should look like. And looking at it from this angle, that frost pattern goes all the way to the back, leaving only about an inch and a half space on the back side, which is perfect. This is precisely how your freeze dryer should look during the freezing stage. The drying cycle has now kicked in. We're about 17 minutes into it. Notice we're about 14 hours into the entire process, and my vacuum is measuring around 507, 508 millitorr, which is exactly where it needs to be. Towards the end of the drying process, that number is going to drop down to about 250, and all of that is completely normal. All right, so everything looks great at this stage. The freezing and the drying cycle is now complete, and the first thing I'm noticing is the ice rings. We have a beautiful ice ring formation. This is where the water sublimated and stuck to the side of the walls. Looks perfect. And as we pull out our bread, let's go ahead and see if it is finished. Now, the bread at this stage should be ultra crispy, kind of powdery a little bit, very delicate. And all we're going to do is give it a quick press and see what happens. Okay, absolutely. Just falls apart right in my hand. And this is precisely what it should look like if you've done it correctly. We are going to pull the very bottom tray because sometimes that can dry a little slower, but not in this case. This is dried at the exact same rate. And this is the top shelf. Let's see what that looks like. Perfect. Our bread run has been successful, so let's go ahead and close this video off with just a few thoughts.
Bread run looks great, and now it's time to start freeze drying. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, we actually did all that 4 months ago, and we've been freeze drying all sorts of stuff between now and then. And so if you're not subscribed to this channel already, and you're into this kind of content, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. And heck, why not give this video a thumbs up? And that way you could see all of the different projects that we freeze dried in the Pro model. So let's go ahead and talk about the specific upgrades. I made a few notes right here on my phone that we're going to kind of go into. The first thing that I want to talk about is the pump. This was a bit of a surprise to me because I was expecting the traditional Premier pump with the unit, but instead I got the XL Premier pump. And so you're going to get the XL Premier pump with the large and the extra large freeze dryer. And that XL is a 10 CFM pump. And for those of you that are curious, it is super quiet. Matter of fact, I think the compressor might be a little bit louder than the pump. And so if you're in a small house or an apartment and you don't want to disrupt the neighbors, or you don't want a machine that basically is the loudest thing in the room, don't worry, it's actually very quiet. I was pretty surprised. So the large and the extra large come with the XL Premier pump, and the small and the medium is going to come with the regular Premier pump, which is a 7 CFM pump. All right, the next group of upgrades comes down to performance. We're talking about a more efficient unit. You've got wiring and heating pads that have both been upgraded. So the heating pads heat the food a little more efficiently. I have noticed, because I've used both the large and the Pro, that I use about 20-25% less electricity when I do run the Pro model. Now, granted, it's kind of subjective to the weather and to the temperature of the room, because the room that I have mine in is not temperature controlled, but I did find that the unit was more efficient. I did find that the top shelf and the bottom shelf dried basically at the same rate as everything else. So you got to remember, the top shelf and the bottom shelf are the trickiest to dry because you have ice buildup on the top and the bottom. But with the upgraded heating pads and the upgraded wiring, they dried at the same rate as everything else, and I didn't have to typically go back in and add more dry time. So I think that that's a good improvement for the unit, because in the large unit, the non-Pro unit, I found that the bottom shelf and the top shelf generally required a little more dry time depending on what I was making. And so nice change there. This next upgrade is all about capacity. And here's where things get a little tricky, because there has been some mixed feelings about this particular upgrade. Freeze drying isn't a one-size-fits-all. Some people do candy, some people do, long-term food storage, some people do fruit or dog treats, and so everybody has their own needs and requirements. So not everybody has necessarily liked this particular upgrade, and so what Harvest Right did was added an additional shelf to every Pro model. So the large used to have 5 shelves, it now has 6, so on and so forth. And I'll give you an example of what the 5-shelf system looks like. And notice you've got a lot of space between the shelves. And so all Harvest Right did was reduce that space so that they can fit an additional shelf, which is great if you're into making things that don't really expand a lot. But if you're into making things like candy or brittle or caramel or things like that, that tend to puff up quite big, the new shelving system might be a little problematic. So you're just gonna have to play with it, play with the temperatures and the times, and maybe cut your pieces a little bit smaller than you normally would. Otherwise, you're gonna have a candy explosion inside of your freeze dryer. That's not gonna be very fun to clean up. I'm personally not opposed to the additional shelf because I think in the long term, it's gonna pay pay out for me, at least because of how I freeze dry. But if you're really into doing, like I said, those things that tend to puff up quite a bit and you find that that additional shelving space is not adequate, well then that might be something you're going to have to consider. All right, now that's where most people stop when it comes to the capacity upgrade when they review this particular freeze dryer. But there's something that most people leave out, and I'm going to tell you what that is. Now, this particular topic really deserves its own video because it can be detrimental to your freeze dryer if you're not careful. And so we'll be sure to cover that in a different video here coming up. But having more shelves doesn't necessarily mean that you can freeze dry more food, okay? So I want you to think about that. You can definitely put more food in it, but it doesn't mean you can freeze dry more food. And here's why I say what I say. A freeze dryer's food capacity isn't determined by how many shelves are in the freeze dryer, right? You can have 10 shelves, or you could just have one giant box. That shelving system doesn't determine how much food you can freeze dry. What determines how much food you can freeze dry is the actual drum of the freeze dryer. And that's rated in something called ice capacity. Now, if you look up freeze dryers online, you're gonna find that each one of them has its own ice capacity, and that's the actual rating for how much food you can freeze dry. And so just to give you a quick heads up, it took a bit of digging to get the ice capacity of this particular freeze dryer because it's not on the Harvest Right website, not for the home units. But the large Pro freeze dryer has an ice capacity of 12 to 16 pounds. Now what that means is that 12 to 16 pounds of ice can build up on the wall before it starts becoming a problem. All right, you don't really want to exceed that 12 to 16 pound range when it comes to buildup on the drum of the Harvest Right freeze dryer. And so you could do that with 4 shelves, you could do it with 1 open box, you could do it with 6 shelves. It really doesn't matter. And the difference between the large and the large Pro is the shelving system, not the drum system. And so technically speaking, both units can freeze dry the exact same amount of food. It's just that the large Pro now gives you the option to space that food out a little bit better. And so it should dry a little bit faster because your food is spaced out better, which is one of the things that I've noticed. So definitely don't jam each shelf just because it's available. I've certainly done that, and I've now learned that that's not the right way to do it, and you will absolutely shorten the life of your freeze dryer if you do that on a regular basis. Matter of fact, I asked Harvest Right, and a good large majority of service calls are from people that actually overload their machine by packing each one of the shelves, and it just completely wreaks havoc on the pump and other things in their freeze dryer. And so we'll cover that in a separate video, like I said earlier, so that doesn't happen to you. Now, in case you were wondering, let me share with you the ice capacity for the small, medium, and large. The small Pro has an ice capacity of 6 to 10 pounds. The medium has an ice capacity of 10 to 12 pounds, and the large has an approximate ice capacity of 12 to 16 pounds. And so how much food does that actually translate to? That's kind of an impossible question because all food has different moisture content, right? If you freeze dry cooked chicken versus, let's say, a soup, right? The soup is obviously going to release more moisture than the cooked chicken. So as far as the large goes, if you stick between 25 and 27 pounds, you're good to go. All right, so what I would do is I would divide 25 to 27 pounds over 6 trays and then freeze dry it. You'll be in business. All right, now the last category of upgrades for the Pro units, in my opinion, deals with fixing issues that were prevalent in the older units, whether it was relays, whether it was holding a vacuum or keeping a vacuum or whatever. This last category kind of addresses each one of those issues one by one, and it's kind of encouraging. And I can say, having used the large and the Pro, that I am not experiencing the same issues with the Pro unit that I did with the large unit. So it does seem, at least for the moment, we're probably 4 months into it, that these upgrades are certainly beneficial to the machine. All right, let's talk about one of those upgrades, the relays. Now, there's a little confusion here as to what actually got upgraded. So let's just take a second to clear the air so that you can know the difference between the old unit and the Pro unit. The old unit used 100% mechanical relays. The Pro unit upgraded one of those relays to a solid state relay. So the Pro unit has the relay associated with the heater that is now solid state. Everything else is mechanical. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. All right, there's really no need to put solid state relays on all of them because they're not constantly switching on and off and on and off. Once they turn on once, they basically stay on during the entire freeze dry cycle. But the heater relay does flip on and off, on and off, on and off. And that one does benefit from having a solid state upgrade. So we should see less relay failures on the Pro units. Next on the front panel, you've got the acrylic door that's been upgraded, so you have a better quality acrylic. Some people in the past were complaining about it cracking and so on and so forth, especially with the cold and the hot and the amount of pressure and vacuum and all that stuff. And so the acrylic door has been upgraded, so that issue probably is going to be fixed. These last two upgrades deal with vacuum issues. On the old Harvest Right freeze dryers, people experienced a tremendous amount of vacuum problems, whether the unit wasn't holding vacuum, whether it wasn't getting to vacuum, they were getting vacuum errors, whatever the problem was. And it's because there's a couple of places on the Harvest Right that have been prone to leakage. Well, one of the upgrades, kind of a simple upgrade, was a stainless steel drain valve. As simple as this upgrade sounds, it's absolutely brilliant and should have been done a long time ago because this was the source of frustration for many people. The old unit, the old drain valve, was prone to corrosion and would constantly leak. And now that we have an upgraded stainless valve, I don't see that happening. The next upgrade in this category is that wiring harness at the top of the chamber. Now, the old unit, and let me just real quick show you what mine looked like. All right, guys, so this is what the old one looks like, and this is where everything plugs into the top of the chamber. Notice that I've got like some sort of an acrylic coating right there at the top, and over time, that expanded and contracted, and as you can see right here, mine's already starting to crack, which is probably why I wasn't getting very good vacuum. The Pro models abandoned the white sealant and they moved towards a glass epoxy. And according to Harvest Right, this is supposed to fix the issue. I can say that using both the older machine and the Pro model has given me better results when it comes to vacuum testing and actually freeze drying food. I've been able to hold those 500 millitors with no problem, even going down into that 180 to 50 without any issues almost in every run. Whereas the older machine was giving me vacuum problems just within a couple of months of using it. And so those two upgrades I do feel are significant enough to notice a difference in the way the machine vacuums, and I think that it also contributes to the efficiency of the machine. The last upgrade is the modular element. Now, this technically isn't a new upgrade for the Pro unit because it was introduced before the Pro unit, but you are able to maintenance your unit a little bit easier because the control panel where the screen is and the motherboard and the relays, that particular section is modular. You can remove it and you can either send it in or have a technician, replace whatever needs to be replaced without completely dismantling your entire machine. Overall, it's a nice machine with an attractive price point. It did exactly what it was supposed to do right out of the gate. As far as options go, you do have a lot of options in the Pro models. You've got the small, medium, large, extra large. And Harvest Right, I'm not entirely sure when they're going to release this information, but they're about to come out with 2 commercial units that are enormous. For those of you who are more into commercial freeze drying, these might be an appealing unit. With that being said, a freeze dryer is a sensitive piece of equipment. It does need to be maintained properly if you want to have that longevity in your freeze dryer, and that really applies to all manufacturers of freeze drying. If you take care of your machine properly, you will have a freeze dryer for a long time. I do feel like the upgrades that they made, albeit some very small, some quite large, are substantial, and it does make the Pro model a better freeze dryer. And I think that most people who use this at home are going to be very happy with having this technology in their house so that they could either start a business or be able to produce food that they normally wouldn't have been able to do it. But if you're more advanced and you've been freeze drying for quite some time, you might find a couple of things on this particular unit that they could improve. And I do think that over the years, as competition increases, as the demand increases, and people start to, kind of bring their own ideas to the table, you will see the Harvest Right freeze dryers sort of get upgraded yet again, probably a couple more times. Right now, it's kind of like a one-size-fits-all kind of control, whether you're doing candy or regular food. You set the time, the temperature, and basically you hit start. It's finished whenever it's finished. I wish there was more control in the algorithm. I wish from that control panel you had more accessible options, and I would imagine that in the future you're going to start to see that. It's probably going to come with a specific price point as well, but I think that it would be neat for those of us who kind of want to go in and build our own recipes. I also think that the cooling of the chamber could be more efficient. If you've ever run a cooling cycle and you try to get to negative 20 degrees, at least in my experience, it does take a significant amount of time. Now, when you're in the cooling and freezing mode, that doesn't really draw a lot of energy, not quite like when the vacuum pump is on, but I do wish that the cooling time was a lot shorter, meaning I wish that it cooled a lot faster. And I do think that in the future, those are going to be changes that we might see with some of these freeze dryers. Anyway, just a couple little things that I'm nitpicking. There's a few other things I'm not even going to go into, but I can say that the Pro model is definitely a significant improvement over previous models. And so if you're interested in buying a freeze dryer, this might be one you should consider. Another thing you might want to consider is customer service. How does Harvest Right deal with its customers? How does Harvest Right deal with the problems that the machine has? I've got my own experience with Harvest Right. Yours may be different. If you have any experience with Harvest Right or any particular issues that you might have with your machine, do me a favor, leave a comment in the comment section below. Number one, that's going to help the algorithm for this video so that it can reach the audience that it's intended for. But number two, it might help other people make a more informed and educated decision. I'm going to put a link to the Harvest Right website in the description box below in the event that you want more information on these freeze dryers. And although I'm an affiliate for Harvest Right, I try to bring you the most honest and unbiased review that I can, because at the end of the day, it means less to me that you buy a Harvest Right freeze dryer and more to me that you are 100% satisfied with the purchase that you've made. All right, guys, thanks a lot for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to check out the videos of us using this machine in various freeze drying projects. And then, of course, I get to share a little bit more of my experience with you at that time as well. If you enjoyed this video or got something out of it, give it a thumbs up. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.